is a Japanese Olympic swimmer, put in from a very young age, hours and hours and hours and hours of time and training and practice swimming in the pool. In 2015, however, her track to the Olympics and professional swimming was derailed by a bout of anemia. She all of a sudden found that she wasn't performing very well physically in her meets. In fact, in 2015, she finished 40th out of 40 in her event, the 200 individual medley in the Japanese national swimming competition. But she was able to go to the doctor and get that diagnosed and have her body be helped and healed, and she sort of worked back up physically and reached, once again, the top of her sport. But then in 2019, she had a bout of anxiety and depression, and just the mental toll and weight of everything she had done began to just weigh on her and crush her. She said that it was more difficult than actually the physical problems that happened in 2015 were the mental problems that she had to go through in 2019. And they ended up resulting in a disqualification that happened for her in 2019 at the World Championships in her event again, the 200-meter individual medley. So she gets the World Championships, she's going to go to her event, she's disqualified. And she just spoke about the dramatic feeling of pain, failure, depression that resulted from that disqualification. But somehow, and this is something that we all look at and admire very greatly, something indomitable about her spirit rose up, got back in the pool, kept going, and she went to the Tokyo Olympics in 2020. And at the Tokyo Olympics, she put together her best efforts and her best swims, and she won gold in both the 100-meter and the 200-meter individual medley. She was the first Japanese woman to win multiple gold medals at Olympic Games. And in a profile that was done about her after this historic achievement, she said this about her relationship with swimming. She said, "I had times when I wanted to give up swimming, but I learned to accept it and turn it into a strength." Right? But she walked through that on the way to going through times where she wanted to give up. And when we look at that in human experience, when we look at the ability of humans to move through things that are difficult and achieve and not give up and reach the mountaintop, whatever the mountaintop is, we see that as exemplary and as particularly valuable. And one of the ways why we see it as exemplary and valuable is because we know how easy it is in our own lives to give up. We know how easy and natural it is in our own lives when we hit some sort of obstacle to say, "I'm stopping at that. I'm done. I can't pick that up anymore. I can't do that again. I'm done with that. I'm giving up." The American novelist Mark Twain speaks about this dynamic in a sort of wry way when he said this about giving up smoking. He said, "Giving up smoking is the easiest thing in the world. I know because I've done it 1,000 times." Giving up is something that comes very naturally to us. And at the same time, it can lead to great chronic challenge and pain. Because oftentimes when we set something down, even under the best of circumstances, it becomes something that sticks with us over time. And then the pain of giving up one time becomes my present pain of having given up in the past. And that begins to stick with us and stay with us over and over and over again. Furthermore, some instances of giving something up, maybe I give up on this particular job opportunity, or I give up on this particular task, over time snowballs into giving up on a whole category of things. And I say, maybe I've just given up on this passion altogether, now that 5 or 6 smaller givings I've added together. And as that happens, the experience of giving up becomes an incredibly painful thing that lives with us over and over and over again. And we begin to give up on certain beliefs in our life that are core to what it might mean to live in a hopeful existence towards a good future. And we start to have deep-seated phrases and ideas that go from our soul, refrains that are stuck over and over again. My marriage is never going to be what I wanted it to be, right? I'm never going to be happy anymore. Or like I'm never really going to laugh again. This passion of mine is never going to find its full expression. God gave it to me and it's just in there. it's just going to wither and die. And in this place, the ways in which giving up leads to deep, chronic pain in our lives, we find ourselves both dissatisfied with being there, but we don't know what else to do. Like, we got to this place because we experienced real disappointments. And what do we do with disappointment, stacked upon disappointment, stacked upon disappointment over time? What else is there to do than at some point to say, I just need to give that up and move on? Why do we give up? Why do we chronically give up? And why is it so easy for us to give up? Not just on other things, but maybe even on ourselves. These are some of the questions that we're going to be looking at today. We're walking through our sermon series in the book of Galatians. We're just opening the text of Galatians up and walking through it verse by verse. Today we're going to be in Galatians chapter 5, verses 7 to 12. If you don't have any contact with the book of Galatians, there's a bunch of ground clearing sermons at the beginning of the series. You can go back and listen to them. All the sermons are online. You can watch them on video or download them on audio. Get all your contextual information that you don't have about the text of Galatians. All you really need to know today for our text is that the book of Galatians, I'm hoping there are some of you that, by the way, in this moment, could just rattle this apart. You've heard it like 7 times. The book of Galatians is written by the Apostle Paul in the first century to first century Christians living in the Roman province of Galatia, which is modern-day Turkey. They've come under the influence of the teaching that is telling them that in order for them to live a meaningful life in relationship with God and other people, they have to get a bunch of things right. In other words, they have to have not given up on the right things over time and gotten them right over and over and over and over and over and over again. In particular, religious and cultural observances in the context of the text of Galatia, of course. And Paul thinks that this teaching is so antithetical to the gospel of God's gift of grace to us in Christ Jesus that he's writing to them this letter, doing everything that he knows how to do to get them out from the burden of this teaching. Again, our text today is Galatians chapter 5, verses 7 to 12. I'll read the text aloud. You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion is not from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view than mine, and the one who is troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. But if I, brothers, still preach circumcision, why am I being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. I feel like saying here, the word of the Lord, just because it's funny. Sometimes in life we give up. Sometimes in life we give up. Paul says to the Galatians, you were running well. The word here for running is the word exegetical. It is taken from the Greek word for run, as in running a race. When Paul says here you are running well, he's not just talking about sort of out for a jog. He's taking the language of running from an Olympic metaphor, which of course was rooted in ancient Greece, and the Olympic Games, different sets of Olympic Games, were held in different Greco-Roman cities that were contemporary with Paul. So this idea of the track, the gymnasium, that's what I'm looking for, of the athletic games was contemporary to Paul, and he uses the idea of a race multiple times in his writings and his personal dialogue with other people. And so when Paul says here, you are running well, he's not just using this as some soft metaphor to talk about how he's kind of jogging along. He's saying you have exerted the same sort of exertion that an Olympic athlete might exert on their way to running sincere exertion, and we're willing to spend any number of resources that we can marshal to pursue that thing. We run after those things. Not in the sense that I run when I rarely run or exercise. Oh, just staring at the mile marker going up the treadmill. By mile marker, I mean quarter of a mile marker. God, please help me make it through this quarter mile. Oh my God. No, we run in the way that any serious athlete would run and pursue the objective of the game that they're playing. We do them in our own lives with things that we are actually pursuing. Whence, therefore, comes the giving up? If we're pursuing it with that sincerity, with that sort of seriousness, with that conviction, it's surprising then, and not a given, that we would just give up. But this is what Paul says. He says, you were running well. Like back there, you were running. Implicit in what Paul is saying is the idea that the Galatians have stopped. They've given up. And it's not a casual thing when someone has set out to pursue something that is deeply meaningful for them and deeply valuable. It's never a casual thing when all of a sudden they stop. We've seen that in the lives of other people. Right? Have you ever known someone for like one particular pursuit is like their whole life? This particular pursuit is the thing that gives them meaning, value, purpose. They're known in their social circles as the person who's pursuing that thing. And then you lose touch with them for a while, and you meet them again a couple years later, and they're like, well, yeah, I stopped doing that back there. Have you ever experienced that? It's strange. And it's not strange because they stopped. Sometimes people stop doing things. It's strange because whenever you watch someone seriously exert after something, and they stop, you know it wasn't a casual thing. You know, oh, there's a story here. Like we've been out of touch for too long. Something happened. Because it's never casual when we give up on things that actually align with our deepest passions and hopes and dreams for our life. Giving up is not just not casual, it's painful. It's emotionally painful and challenging. Because not only are we stopping doing something that we really wanted to come to fruition, but we experience often all sorts of shame and guilt at having stopped doing that or stopped pursuing it. This can be in a relationship. This can be in a career path. This can be in a place we wanted to live. This can be in the pursuit of any meaningful and valuable thing. And when we give up on it, it isn't just painful in the fact that we stopped doing that. Just the very act of giving up hurts. It hurts us to say, I stopped that. I'm not pursuing that anymore. I gave up on it. And that emotional pain can often lead us to then have a self-dialogue where we just blame ourselves for having given up. The idea that begins to run through our head is an idea that's essentially some sort of guilt dialogue where we say, I failed at that, I give up. I stopped, and that's my fault, and that's all I need. When we think I gave up, we tell ourselves that we're totally to blame. But that actually isn't true. When we stop doing something, or when we give up on something, we never just do that in a vacuum. When we give up on something, we give up in the face of something challenging, in the face of some obstacle or a chronic hindrance, and after experiencing obstacle after obstacle over time, and discouragement after discouragement over time, that then puts us in a place of saying, I don't know what else to do but to give up on it. We don't just give up because overnight we say, I'm done. We give up because of the chronic hindrances that we face and the discouragement that we feel over time. And as we experience those things, it robs us of the ability to be able to imagine anymore a future where that thing comes to pass. In other words, it robs us of hope. Hope. The ability in the present to long for and trust that something that I want in the future might come to pass. And obstacle after obstacle after obstacle leading to discouragement after discouragement after discouragement over time robs us of hope, and that's when and why we give up. We give up when we lose hope. Give up when we lose hope. a source of hindrance for them that is removing the hope that the Galatians have. Paul says in verse 7, you are running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? And later it seems like Paul's actually asking this question. He maybe has an idea of who's hindered them, but like the exact person, it seems that he doesn't know. Right? Because later in verse 11, he's like, but if I brothers still preach, in verse 10, the one who is troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. Paul's like, I'm not exactly sure who it was who got in and hindered you and discouraged you, but someone has hindered or discouraged you. And again, the use of the word hindrance here in verse 7 is playing on this athletic metaphor. The idea is that someone has come along and caused the Galatians to stumble in the sincere effort that they were putting forth in their rebellion after Jesus. And this discouragement, even though it's entered in to one aspect of the Galatian church in their life, through one individual, spreads. Like discouragement always does. Like when we experience discouragement and failure and hopelessness in one part of our life, it always spreads and seeps out into other areas of our life that we otherwise would feel fine about or confident about. That's what Paul says in verse 9. He says, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. A little bit of discouragement on the way to hindering you spreads like yeast in a batch of dough. It's just the tiniest thing, but it gets into everything. And Paul's saying to the Galatian church, that's what's happening to you, but that also happens into our own lives. The discouragement that we feel, the loss of hope that we feel, it spreads. And a relationship failure leads to a sense of alienation. Our job leads to a sense of not being able to be present and enjoying our life with our friends, leads to a sense of alienation for myself. It just spreads and spreads and spreads. A little leaven leavens the whole lump of our lives. Now Paul goes out of his way to try to expose to the Galatians that the people who are causing them to stumble are actually total hypocrites. He's like, they obviously are not able to do what they are saying you should do, so you should listen to them. Paul says these false teachers in the Galatian church that are hindering the Galatians to this teaching that there's more that they need to do that they can never live up to. Paul says they don't even do that. They don't even go all the way to their own teachings. This is why Paul says in verse 12, I wish those who unsettle you would masturbate themselves. Right? Remember, Paul's talking about this in the context of a conversation around circumcision. One of the many practices that would embody a religious and cultural way of getting things right in relationship to God. And so Paul's in effect saying to the Galatians, listen, if these people are getting themselves right with God by cutting off a little bit of flesh, why don't they just lop off the whole thing? That's what they would do if they were really living up to their own standard. But Paul's like, they're not. They're not. They're calling you to try to run across a finish line, but at the other end of that finish line, there's only a new finish line to get to. And they're not even willing to run across that other finish line. Paul says these people will bear their own judgments. The one who's troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. The ESV here uses the word penalty. It's the same Greek word for judgment. The word bear here connotates a passive sense of carrying. Not that God is so angry because he's going to judge them, in a way that we're often taught to think about God, but that these teachers are putting themselves in an inherently critical position where they're calling other people into something that they cannot live out in their own lives, and that will one day prove to be true, and it will sit on them as a judgment for what they were doing. That they'll bear that, they'll carry it. And we're discouraged all the time in our own lives because we're looking at other people, and sometimes they're doing it, but sometimes it's like not their fault. It's just what humans do. But sometimes other people are trying to make us look at them and be like, I'm a little further in the race than you are. And there's nothing more discouraging when you're running as hard as you can after something, and you look in front of you and someone's going, well, I'm just a couple paces ahead. Or I've gotten across this finish line up here. You're over here, you're still running hard, but I'm over here. And this is a definitive line that I've gotten across It's helpful. Like, it helps us intellectually. When we look at the races of life that we are running, in all these different aspects of our existence, it's helpful, isn't it, on some level, to know that this whole, I've gotten further than you, so you should feel bad about yourself, and maybe over time, that the whole thing is a fiction. It's not real. It's a lie. It doesn't exist. And the people in relationship to whom you currently feel discouraged about where you are in your own race, those people up there feel discouraged about people in front of them. And they feel discouraged about people in front of them, and in front of them, and in front of them, and in front of them. And part of what they do to make themselves feel better is they look at people behind them and say, well, at least I'm not where you are. And it is helpful on some level intellectually to know that. It helps us approach some of these aspects of our life where we feel deep disappointment to say, I know that this disappointment that I'm feeling, this temptation to give up, it's related to stuff that's not real, it's a fiction. And everyone's caught up in it. They can't help themselves. We can't help ourselves. But it's not real. And that's helpful. But it's always so helpful. Because it doesn't take away the pain. We know it in our heads. This whole, I need to cross this finish line before I die. We know that that isn't real. But it doesn't take away the pain of feeling like, but I just still feel like I didn't cross that line. I didn't feel like I didn't run that race all the way. And I just can't deal with the discouragement anymore. And this is just where we find ourselves in life. Over and over and over again. This is how the world is. And everything we do in life, every race we run, there's always some finish line. Someplace we need to get to in order to feel like we made it. Or something meaningful happened in my life. And when we don't meet that line, we're constantly judged as a failure. Over and over and over again. It's not having measured up. And this feeling that we haven't gotten somewhere, haven't measured up over time, discourages us, it steals our joy, it robs us of hope, and it grinds and wears on us over and over again until finally we say, I can't do this anymore, it's so painful, even though I know that this whole thing's a lie. I know that this status structure of who got plastic, I know it's all fake, but it still hurts. It hurts too badly, and so I'm done with that. I'm giving that thing up. But the problem is that when we do that in our lives, we just step out of a race in one area that's governed by a finish line and find a new race to start. We're like, okay, I'm not going to find my identity in my career anymore, I'm going to find it in family. Okay, I'm not going to find it in just a relationship anymore, I'm going to find it in my kids. Okay, I'm not just going to find it in how my relationship with my kids are going, I'm going to find it in my social circle. And we find a new race to run. But all of those tracks are governed by a finish line. All of them. And so you get exhausted by one, and you step on to the next one, and spend the next 10 years of your life trying to run that race, and it's still governed by the same logic. That you're just never quite at the line that you need to be at. And so we just live lives of giving up on stuff. Because there's nothing else to do in the world when we run races in our lives in relationship to finish lines that we can never cross. There's nothing less but giving up. And then the giving up over time becomes an identity of giving up. And a deep-seated feeling of having given up. And we spend our lives trying to forget the facts that we feel like we've given up on the things that are important in our life. And that is how the world works, but it is so different with God. Because with God, we're invited to start running after the things that are meaningful in our lives in relationship to no finish line. There's no finish line in the races in our lives that God calls us to run. We don't run them in relationship to the idea that I need to get somewhere in order for this running to have matter. We run them in relationship to God's invitation. That's it. We're just running in relationship to the invitation of the living God. And when we're doing something from a place of strong exertion and passion out of 6:13 says this about the promises that God has in our lives. It says, when God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. God says, the promises that I'm bringing about in the lives of people, they can't hold those promises. They can't see them to the end. They can't bring them to fruition. But I can bring them to fruition because I don't give up. And so I promise by myself that I will not give up on the promises that I made. And when we begin to receive, as Paul calls the Galatians to do, to live in relationship to the one who doesn't say, cross this finish line and your life will be meaningful, but who says, just live every step of the way in relationship to my calling, my invitation, my voice. Stop looking at where other people are. Just live in relationship to my voice. That when we do that, it actually frees us from the burden of the finish line and releases us to just say, God, you're working in my life, and I'm just responding to it, and you don't give up. God doesn't give up. And God doesn't give up on us. Not only does God not give up, but God steps into the experience of giving up. God doesn't just look at humans and say, someone needs to verify the work in your life. And at some point you're going to give up, so I'm going to keep working on your behalf. I'm going to work on your behalf. God does do that for us. But God also enters into our experience of giving up, and it changes what giving up can lead to. God's like, not only am I going to work, am I going to keep going, but I'm going to enter in to the human reality of the eventuality of giving up and turn the place of giving up into a place where we can get back. Turn a place of failure into a place of a new beginning, and turn ultimately a place of death and ultimately giving up into a place of life. This is what the Bible says about Jesus in Matthew chapter 27, verse 50. And when Jesus had tried again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. He gave it up. Jesus gave up. He laid down his life on his own accord to turn the places of giving up into our old life, into places of new life, into places of starting again. And when we in our own lives both begin to run the races of our life in relationship to the God who calls us, who invites us, not under the logic of some finish line that we have to hit, but the gracious invitation to run, to pursue, to bring our best, because it's so freeing to be out there under that finish line. So freeing to do that in dialogue to a gracious God. When we do that, when we receive that, and also believe that God has turned the places of giving up into our lives into a place of new life. The wild thing is that actually produces the power of endurance in our own lives. That's what's so cruel about the way the world cycles. When we try to will ourselves into greater endurance, it just doesn't work. It fails at some point. Because the power to endure for a person, maybe the power to endure for God is his will. Interesting theological question. Who knows? But for a person, the power to endure comes from receiving God's call in our lives and believing that he is able to work those things out in our lives. That's why Paul is able in this passage, even though he's watching the Galatians give up, that's why he says, I am confident in a future reality. I'm hopeful for a future reality. Because Paul trusts the power of God in the lives of the Galatians. In verse 7 he says, I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view than mine. I have confidence in the Lord that you will. That keyword will is like the future. Paul says, I have confidence that you will do this thing in the future. You will rejoin me in the world of grace. Where does Paul get that confidence from in the face of watching people give up? His confidence comes from the fact that he's not running in relationship to a finish line that he's got to jump over.
He's running in relationship to the call of God in his life. He's running in relationship to the call of God. And he believes that God is able to take the places in our lives where we've given up and make them new. And out of that place, Paul has the strength to not give up. Out of that place, Paul has the strength to endure. That same power is available in our own lives, but it doesn't come from running all the harder to cross that finish line. It comes from changing the way we run these races in our lives. It comes from saying, God, I'm exerting my effort not because I have to get to a certain place, but because you have called me to express who you made me to be by running this race. And I'm going to keep running that in that way, from that place of grace and invitation and freedom. And I believe you, God, that you are able to take the place where I want to give up, and maybe the place where I have given up, and turn them into something new. That becomes the power to endure in our lives. And the world needs people like this. The world needs people who are faithful to endure, who have the power, not because we set out to be faithful, enduring people, but because God is actually working in our lives to make us live in one of the races of our lives in a different way. To become faithful people in an unfaithful time. To become honest and humble people in a puffed up and dishonest time. To become people